Hello and welcome to the County Conversation, sponsored by the Cricket Draft, the show where we take the three most interesting stories from the last week of county cricket and give you the inside track to them here. I'm Cameron Ponsonby, I'm joined by Nick Friend, and later in the show we will also hear from the cricketers James Coyne and Kent seamer Keith Dudgeon, who will be with us later in the show. Right, our three topics for this week are depth in English cricket. Is it secretly quite good at the moment? The overseas situation, why is it so complicated? Who's Fergus O'Neill? And what is a Liam Guthrie? He's not actually an overseas, to be really accurate. And correlation versus causation. Tom Banton played the innings of his life last week, 371 for Somerset, having kind of previously very publicly spoken about hating the game in effect. And we discuss the connections between form and enjoyment of the game and a potentially kind of missing dynamic from the conversation. But first, week one of the county championship is done with thrillers at Taunton, Lords, and a number of high quality contests across the board, which, Nick, is basically where we're going to start. Because if you think about the common conversation with county cricket, that kind of you think about the Kevin Peterson throwaway comments of this world where 18 counties, it's too many, there's a low standard of cricket being played across the country. Throw some names at you. Batters, those on the edge of selection. Jordan Cox, tonned up. Tom Banton, 370. Durham's batting lineup, incredibly strong at the moment. Then you consider the likes of players like Dom Sibley, Rory Burns, Sam Robson, Keaton Jennings, who are excellent players who won't get a look in. Seamers, got Josh Tongue coming back. Sam Cook, Sonny Baker, spinners, Farhan Ahmed, Jack Carson, Archie Vaughan, Tazim Ali, youngsters who are now going to go alongside kind of Bashir and Leach. Is the selection pool for England actually fairly strong at the moment?
Yeah, like it's going to sit on the fence there, I suppose. Like that's a lot of names. I suppose it depends on how good you think all those players are. If you know what I mean, they've all been talked about for one reason or another. Some have had a go. Sam Robson's go was 11 years ago now. Others have had a go off the back of very little. Sonny Baker, his Hampshire debut last week was his second ever first class appearance. So, Tazim Ali, yes, has kind of found himself bowling at England's Test players in Pakistan because he was there, but he's ultimately a teenager who's played a couple of games for England under 19. So there's a lot of potential, certainly. And the under 19s won South Africa over the Winton Day. The Lions took a very young squads to Australia. Some of those, even someone like Josh Tongue, who I'm sure we'll get to in a bit, he's hardly played a game of cricket in the last 2 years. He hardly played a game of cricket in the 2 years before that. But there have been two test appearances in that time. So I suppose that the pool looks big because the way that selection's done has been changed, hasn't it? And guys you didn't mention there, someone like Max Holden, for example, got a big 180 to both save the game and then nearly set up the game for Middlesex. He's never had a look in with England, certainly since under 19 level.
That's
but equally, he averaged 70 in the ILT20 over the winter. So I think the depth is there. Yeah, I suppose the complication at the moment is that there's so much clarity in a way as to what England want that depth is kind of squeezed by, as Rory Burns has said quite publicly about his own game, like kind of knows where he stands. So there's both depth and.
If we can focus on the seamers you mentioned, because Stokes previously talked about wanting a battery of kind of fast bowlers, and then everyone fell over. Like Mark Wood injured again, Ollie Stone out for effectively the entirety of the Test summer again. Jofra Archer is now finding his feet once again in the IPL, but then there was kind of Bryden Castle having his toe injury, and there was a period of time where I thought, right, there is this kind of back catalogue of seamers. Then they all disappeared. Then now, actually, if you look about who was kind of playing over the first round, there seems to be the shoots coming back again. Even if you're going to consider your Dan Worrells, your Josh Hulls, your Sam Cooks, or otherwise, there does seem to be that bank of players. And I know you kind of thought there was a bit of a summation of the English seamer experience kind of in week one.
Yeah, well, I wrote about it. I ended up at 3 games. I've kind of half jokingly and half seriously decided I can try and see all 18 teams in 7 rounds. So I've seen 6 of them now.
There you go,
I
Daniel
spent day one
Story.
yeah, it's kind of like a budget version, that isn't it? I went to Notts. I was at Notts Durham on day 1 of the season, um, and I was at Taunton on day 3 before going to Lords on day 4. But actually, those first 2 games, Durham, Notts, Worcester, Somerset, were fairly instructive for this, I suppose. And that Neil Colleen was at Trent Bridge, England lead fast bowling coach. Luke Wright was there as well, I think. Because Dylan Pennington was playing, Josh Tongue was playing, Matt Potts was playing, Lyndon James was playing, Farhan Ahmed, who's been away with the Lions and the under-19s, as an off-spinner, was playing, and Folks O'Neill, who obviously isn't eligible to play for England because he's from Australia and he's a 6'4". I say quick, he only bowled around 80 mile an hour, but he was the best bowler on the show on the first day. But by the end of that game, Josh Tongue had taken, I suppose, a match-winning 5 for really, and Dylan Pennington had done what I think got him into that squad last year, which was basically run in and never looked like he stopped running in at that pace, if you know what I mean. It's sort of consistent with that and the energy in his spell. And for Tom, it was a massive game. He'd not taken a wicket for something like 15 months, I don't think. And hardly played a game in that period, I should say. It wasn't like it wasn't a 40-game wicket drought, but he was quick. It was a proper test of quality spell, and it was all the reasons why England like him. And that was actually more than anything just really nice to see him back, because he's going back to the shoulder nerve injury that nearly retired him. He came back from that, played for England, and then since then he's had a pec injury, he's had hamstring injuries. That was his Notts debut a year and a half after joining them. So, pleased for him. But he's one, I suppose, who's on a central contract, who's come back into the fray, who hopefully now keeps fit and has a decent sum with it, particularly now that Ollie Stone, as you said, is missing for a large portion of this summer, if not all of it. So
I think with Tongue is the player where, to kind of show my own lack of knowledge and insight, I remember kind of chatting with some journalists over the Test summer of New Zealand, where I was going, I think I said quite flippantly, he'll never play for England again. I remember that lad, he played like a couple of years ago, and all of kind of the 2 or 3 or 4 kind of people I was chatting with, all kind of double took and went, what are you on about? He is the one player where kind of Rob Key in interviews with journalists actively brings his name up. They really, really like Josh Tongue. And the fact that he's come back after 18 months away effectively through injury, I think he did get 5 in the second innings, but more to the point, he got 4 and 2 overs, which kind of won Notts the game from a position where it looked like it was kind of staggering into a draw. Is exactly the type of high impact bowler that England want and are after. And when we talk about who is next on the pecking order for England, I really think Tongue, they want to get him back involved as quickly as possible. And Sam Cook, in a way that was different from previous years. I can talk about this because I remember I didn't mention it last week, so I thought it might not be allowed to chat about it. Then I heard Mark Butcher on the Wisdom Pod referencing it loads. But I was at Tamal Mills' testimonial lunch, and Luke Wright and Rob Key were giving us a kind of talk on stage, and they were talking about kind of the goodwill that has been built by certain players by missing franchise gigs to go and play with the Lions over in January. And they specifically referred to Sam Cook there, where these guys, they know that there are people in the room who are listening and taking into account what their words are. And if they're going out of their way to say, yes, we really like Sam Cook at this time, he came out to the Lions, we valued that he turned down white ball deals because of his commitment to England and the red ball game. I think when we look around the country and you see kind of these high quality matches on the show where, hey, Pennington, Tongue and Fergus O'Neill, that's a very real world where that could be future Ashes contests, seam bowlers going at one another. Tongue and Cook, I think the next cabs off the rank, Nick. The
other one I'd throw at you, and the reason I mentioned Taunton earlier was that was Casey Aldridge, who's an interesting one because, firstly, because I didn't mention him to you before the show, which would probably have been useful for your information, but he came to me. I just think I don't think Casey Aldridge is far away from being what they'd like Bryden Castle, from being what Bryden Castle's, in someone who could bat sort of 7, 8, 9, broad-shouldered, sort of almost looks like a rugby player. And actually, if we're talking about matching spells, he didn't win the game, but his sort of similar high-impact spells to what Tongue did at Trent Bridge. Took a first innings 5 for on a real flat one at Taunton that only became flat as the game wore on. And then actually, as the game did wear on, it did get really flat. I was there on day 3. He ran in and broke a partnership between Adam Hose and Brett Oliveira that had gone, God, that had lasted a very long time. Late in the day with a big, quick Yorker that hit Adam Hose on the toe, possibly via a bit of inside edge, possibly sliding. But the point was, I suppose that kind of impact for a seamer with an old ball on a real motorway that would end up seeing the team batting last back for 200 over to save the game. It wouldn't at all surprise me if Aldridge ended up in Australia either with the main squad or the Lions squad this winter.
He's got a real like blacksmith's action, like the strong fast bowler who kind
It's
of come
that,
down
isn't
the
it?
village lane, and that's me code wording the fact I don't find it very pretty. I'm sorry,
No,
Casey.
but it reminds me of something that Matt Fisher said to me in pre-season, in an interview on the Cricketer. That I referenced on that Matt Fisher said to him a couple of years ago when he was interviewed when he first made his England debut, and he talked about wanting to look like an Australian fast bowler. And
Sorry, who Matt Fisher said this to who?
so Matt Fisher said this a couple of years ago, and I referenced it with him when I spoke to him a couple of months ago. And he talked about how he's essentially, whenever he's had rehab time, has tried to spend it turning himself into what Josh Hazelwood looks like, what Pat Cummins looks like. Because you look at these guys, and regardless of where the ball's going, how they're bowling. I interviewed Dan Worrell about this last year. And Dan said that he is much lighter when he bowls in England than when he bowls in Australia. Because when he bowls in Australia, he knows you can't just throw the ball up there, let it swing. You've got to be heavy length, run in, and hit a length with purpose and a bit more about you, I suppose. Physically, that is. And I don't think. So I think actually, when you look at someone like an Aldridge or a Cars, I imagine that's probably part of the attraction for England is that you're seeing these guys who look like they're built to run in and slam a ball down, a ball that gets quite soft quite early on a rock hard pitch, which you don't have to do.
A hard day's work.
Yeah, and they are different sports, and that's what all the Australian guys said when the Kookaburra came in here last year at the start of the season. Said you're not going to get the same impact because it's a different game, a different sport to what you're playing over there in Australia.
Just quickly on Dan Worrell, a kind of tidbit I enjoyed from the last week. He didn't play in kind of Surrey's opener versus Essex, and the official line from Surrey is that there is no line. They didn't. They could have just said it's classic Barbara Streisand effect, where if they said 33-year-old man has a bit of a dicky calf, you go okay, and everyone carries on with their life. But I can confirm he's going to be in the squad against Hampshire this coming week for the Oval. And the conspiracy theory that I like, and I think we both like, and we agree is potentially true, is they looked at an incredibly flat Chelmsford wicket.
I think Kebar Roach called it the flattest pitch you'd ever seen, didn't he? I think.
Well, case in point, and they went, you know what, Dan, you have the week off, mate. To just touch on spinners quickly, we're going to head to Edgbaston, where George DeBell was for the Cricketer. He wrote an excellent piece on Jack Carson, which I encourage you to go and read. And there was this kind of little trifecta of Carson, Tazim Ali, and Hamza Sheikh were kind of going toe to toe. And it was a great example of, well, first of all, Hamza Sheikh, he's got massive raps in Warwickshire, and he's had massive raps for a time being. I was chatting to someone who works in the kind of the Pathway Academy system, and he was kind of grouping Sheikh with, I think it was McKinney, Vaughan, and I want to say there's a lad called Dawkins out there, but I'm really forgetting that. I'm sorry. And they were kind of like, those are the four. These are the guys who they've got it kind of up top, like they're really switched on, really kind of strong, mentally strong players. And although Hamza Sheikh hasn't quite got the runs for Warwickshire yet, he's 18 and they're batting him 3 in the county championship. He's an incredibly exciting young talent. And it almost makes what Jack Carson did to him make Jack Carson more exciting, because on a week 1 wicket in April, Carson has bowled him twice through the gate with kind of very classical off-spinners dismissals. And we just have this little bubbling young talent stuff emerging. The same with, just as Warwickshire batting Hamza Sheikh at number 3 and backing him there, they've given an 18-year-old leg spinner in Tazim Ali the ball in week 1. We spoke to Mason Crane on this show last year about how rare it is for leggies to get backing, especially in early season matches, and especially when you're so young and so inexperienced. And Warwickshire have backed 2 young lads, and Warwickshire are reaping the benefits of having had Jack Carson played lots and lots and lots of cricket over the years. One thing I do want to say about Hamza Sheikh, Warwickshire have done a lovely video of him last year where he goes and shows like the game he used to play during COVID. Have you seen this?
Yeah, I interviewed him about it at the time. It was this is the corridor, right? The
The
corridor net.
corridor.
It's extraordinary.
So to paint a picture, it used to be where he played as like a 3 and 4 year old, just in one of the rooms, and then they've kind of extended the garage, and he stands at one end of the house, and then his mate or his dad or his
It's his
brother
dad. It's
stands
his
at the
dad.
other end.
Yeah.
Is his
Ilias, his
dad
brother. Yeah,
chucks the ball down from like the hallway. It goes through a
but
very
like
narrow
wangs
corridor
it.
bit, wangs it. They lay down like a plastic kind of sheet, and they sprinkle water on it so it skips off, and it's quick and it's indoors. And normally when you
I was
and
going to say, and there are mattresses. They've put mattresses on the walls because neighbours. It's
oh, of course.
it's a thing.
Oh,
It's amazing.
well, so this is actually where I'm going to be a slightly negative. Normally, when I see like these kind of games where people are like, oh, we're playing in the garden, like, oh, if you hit the window, you're out, or like that bush is a fielder, you hit the rake, that's 4. I go, God, what a game! I'd love to play that. I must admit, watching Hamza's game, I went, not interested in the slightest. Looks hard, looks difficult, looks too quick, looks like I'm going to break everything. But if you do want to play, potentially play international cricket for England and play for Warwickshire at number 3 by the time you're 18, that's the way to go. Right, it's time for a break, and we'll be back with part 2 very shortly.
The Cricketers award-winning team brings our subscribers news, features and insight on county and international cricket every single day. You can try us now by signing up for £1. Yes, you heard that correctly, just £1 at thecricketer.com/digital.
It's the start of the season. Overseas players are arriving. Overseas players are not arriving. But one player who did make it to the UK is the South African Keith Dudgeon, who arrived in the country on Tuesday, debuted on Friday, and took 7 for on Sunday for his new county, Kent. In the world of last-minute overseas deals, Nick Friend, that's you, Nick, I spoke to him to find out how he ended up in the country with a helping hand from Joe Root. Here is a kind of 2-3 minute excerpt from that chat.
Well, no, Keith, thanks for joining us. I suppose the first thing to ask you, I was with Simon Cook at Kent at their media day back in mid-March, and he was sort of touching wood and crossing fingers that everyone was going to come, overseas players would emerge as they were expected to emerge. But I think, as Kent have found, probably more than anyone, that a lot can change. Like, how have you wound up here? Like, how quickly did this become a deal?
Yeah, it was not as quick as what you'd think. The conversation started last year. There was a potential option to be a replacement for Bayes Swanepoel. He wasn't available for the first few games. So those conversations happened a little bit with Cookie and with Deebs early doors, but unfortunately the NOCs and the way the South African season had panned out, I wasn't able to come. But yeah, so obviously the relationship sort of started there. And then this year, a couple of conversations, I saw Zach Crawley and a couple of the guys at the SA20, and that the conversations then started. And then, they reached out and sort of Deep said, would you like to come? So it was a bit of a no-brainer for me.
So I read elsewhere that you mentioned Zach and at Pal as well with Joe Root. Like, have you, it's sort of tapped into your contacts, and to, I suppose other guys have liked what they've seen, and I suppose it shows how the global game has changed.
100%. Yeah, I think Joe is an incredible person to be around. And it just, one night after a game, a simple conversation where he asked me, would you be interested in playing county cricket? And I said, I would love to. Obviously, I haven't been able to get involved. And then, little did I know that between him and Dan and Zach, that had started a conversation, which was hell of a nice from him. Coming from a man like that to get a little bit of a push. I suppose sometimes it's nice to get your name whispered in the right ear. And I suppose he's a pretty good person to push the name.
Keith Dudgeon there. So he's here until the end of May, but he's keen to stay until the end of the season. Fergus O'Neill, who we referenced earlier, who was the second top wicket taker in the Sheffield Shield last season, can only be here for 28 days.
But he's also
Nick-
keen to stay.
But he's also keen to stay. Nick, why?
Yes. Well, this has become a favourite subject of mine. This is almost like the schedule, sort of my areas. Right, I'll try this in the most layman's, least boring way. So Folks O'Neill is on what is called a PPE visa, which is a paid permitted engagement visa. I know, lovely return to
That
PPE.
sounds exciting.
We thought those days had passed. So PPE visa essentially allows you to be in the country for 28 days, literally in the country. So Folks O'Neill, for example, arrived on Tuesday via Dubai and was thrown into it on Friday because not so frankly gone. We've got you for 28 days. So you're playing. But you're not having a lead-in week. We're not going to get you ready for next Friday.
Oh, sorry. So say that again. So
He's in
Folks
the country.
O'Neill was sitting tight in Dubai, so he arrived the day before the match, so he can make sure.
That's not what I said. Okay. He flew from Australia via Dubai, landed on Tuesday, so he's essentially been in the country 48, 70 odd hours before his first game,
okay.
and as every team in this situation with the PB visa aren't going to go. You have a week to get yourself ready, and we'll see you next week. Because by then, he's down to 20 days. So 28-day visa in the country. You can come, you can leave, that's it. You basically sign someone on that if you can't sign on the proper one. And to be on a proper one, you need to play international cricket. And if you haven't done that, you need to have played a certain number of T20 games in a full member nation.
20
T20 games
years, isn't it?
in a full member nation, in the last 3 years. The idea was, and this is why it's so tough and complicated. The idea was, frankly, well intentioned. The idea was to ensure I suppose you're getting the best overseas talent. But the issue with that, of course, is that as the game is split and you get more single format players, as we see with Folks O'Neill, who did play a fair bit in this year's Big Bash for Melbourne Renegades, a lot of the best red ball bowlers going around are not playing much right ball cricket domestically. Sure. So for Folks O'Neill, you've got Chris Tremaine, who a couple of years ago was at Northampton on a 28-day deal at the start of the season. Someone like, I can't pronounce his name, but Corey Rocchichioli, the off spinner, plays for Western Australia. Same thing, not eligible to play in the County Championship more than the 28-day visa. Certainly last year, I think the same now.
Why is this? Are they considered not skilled enough for something?
The way
English player or something?
There was a time when you had to play international cricket to sign as a county overseas. That was a change to reflect the fact there were a lot of good players outside of outside of international cricket. But the way of doing that, rather than make it a one size fits all, was to go down this route and say, right, if you've played a certain number, 20 over games in a full member nation as well, that's another bit of it, then you are eligible to play essentially as an international sports person's visa as a proper full blown overseas player for as long as you want, which is where Keith Dudgeon wanted to stick around for the end of the season comes in. He was recommended by Joe Root and Zach Crawley during the SA20 in which he played. He's played a fair few T20 games, 21 in the last 2 years. He's not played for South Africa, but that doesn't matter because of that, because that supersedes anything else. So it's appreciate that sounds complicated. And that's kind of because it is. But actually, I wrote a very long piece, fairly exhaustive piece on this on the cricket.com over the winter. And one of the directors of cricket I spoke to back in November said, this is a quote, I can guarantee to you that Fergus O'Neill will wind up somewhere for a month. Because you look at Fergus O'Neill and you go, well, he's ideal. Well, we'll have him in April. He's 6'4", bowls around 80 mile an hour, and he is going to swing around corners, nick guys off, whatever. He's got like a bit of the Hilford House, I reckon, in his action.
Sure.
He's just off the back of a season, so he's fresh. Not fresh. He's good to go.
Match
tunes. But I suppose long-winded question to why. That is why you've got Dudgeon here for that time and O'Neill here for that time. Although Folks O'Neill did say very handily to my colleague Oscar S on our website after day 4 actually that he thinks the rules should be changed and he would like to come back and he would like to come back for longer. Because
so has this made it kind of harder or easier for for teams to make overseas signings? Because on one hand, it sounds harder, but on the other hand, you need so many more because you can only have someone for 28 days. So you've got to get about 6 guys in over the course of a season.
I think the long and short of it is it's never been harder to sign an overseas player, and that's not necessarily just because of part of that is because of the visas. But I'd say the visa thing is almost secondary. The primary, and this is not teaching anyone anything new, is that the landscape has shifted so much that frankly it's much harder to sign your top end players, because if you could be here right now, you could also be at the PSL right now, you could also be at the IPL right now, you could also have just finished a series with New Zealand, which is why some of those players are late. It's also expensive because there's more demand, because there's more opportunity for players around the world. It's not cheap to sign a player, and that's not. And I don't just mean salary and match fees. I mean, if you are Middlesex, for example, and you've got to sign an overseas player, that generally means you're putting that player up. So Dane Patterson arrives pretty soon. That generally means that you're putting Dane Patterson up probably in, I don't know, West Hampstead, around the corner from Lords. Pretty expensive place to live. You're paying for his flights. If you might have family coming over with him, you might be renting a car. And very quickly, DOC said to me over the winter that you end up on top of what you're paying them sort of salary match fee wise, you're paying your overseas players another 35-40% in add-ons almost.
Sure.
And so financially, it makes it trickier as well. And what makes it harder then is that if you are signing players on 28-day PPE visas, if you're having to make several signings, and you're having to make several signings with all of those conditions, flights, accommodation, etc., the price goes up and up and up and up if you're signing 4 or 5 players at a time. That said, the counties, I think, who've done it best the last couple of years, let's say save for Simon Harmer, for example, at Essex, who's got this brilliant relationship, and they found a way of making it work brilliantly. The counties who made it work best, the ones who, like Sussex, have gone, right, we can't sign an overseas player for the season, but what we can do is split our season up into 5 or 6 chunks. So, we need to fill this spot, that spot, this spot. So if you take what they did last year, and I think was the best use of the overseas circuit by anyone for quite a while, they went Pujara early season alongside Jayden Seales, and then Jayden Seales left to play for the West Indies, and then they replaced him with Nathan McAndrew, and then when Pujara left, Daniel Hughes arrived, and when McAndrew went home to prepare for the Australian season, Jayden Adcat arrived. And the key thing with all those 5 is that they all had a prior relationship with either Sussex or Paul Farbrace, and that is massive. So Farbrace had signed McAndrew at Warwickshire. Seales, they'd tried to sign 2 years earlier, if you remember, and that had fallen through, but they'd kept the conversation going with Cricket West Indies. Pujara obviously had quite a long-standing relationship with Sussex. Pujara had recommended Nuad Adcat to the county, and then Daniel Hughes came to Sussex through Farbrace, speaking to Trevor Bayliss and Brad Haddon, 2 people he knew very well. Obviously, was Bayliss' assistant with England. And that is key. And Dudgeon, who've obviously spoken to here, is a really good example of that. That you need to be doing. Simon Cook said this to me actually. The Kent director of cricket, and Kent have been burnt more than most on this subject in the last few years. You need to be doing the player a favour almost to get them over now.
Yeah.
Because if they can be doing you a favour, something can go wrong. So if we take Xavier Bartlett last year, for example, at Kent, great idea, sign an upcoming Aussie quick for the start of the season. Great idea until he signs a Cricket Australia contract. And then suddenly, he's no longer Queensland's responsibility. So CA deal with him. And as we saw with Nathan Lyon last year as well, they will do what is best for Cricket Australia, as they should do. He's their contracted player. So suddenly, Bartlett kind of owes you nothing because you've not really met. And you're not doing him a favour because actually his stock is as high as it's ever been anyway. So take a Dudgeon, or last year with Kent, they ended up with Bear Swanepoel, Charlie Stobo, Tom Rogers. Tom Rogers said to us at the Cricketer last year that he'd happily have played for free because you are doing them a favour by getting them, come play county cricket, mate, have a great time, enjoy your summer, go back and play in your winter next year. You'll have played a good standard cricket over your off season, etc., etc. You'll be good to go. And that is the key now. It's finding a reason for that player to be with you.
A player who doesn't quite count as an overseas this year is Liam Guthrie. Now, he's joined under kind of a 3-year deal with Northamptonshire, and we've kind of picked him out as our kind of county conversation sponsored by the Cricket Draft kind of player of the week. If you are thinking about someone to fit into your teams, think about Liam Guthrie. We also got James Coyne, one of our kind of correspondents, one of our journalists who saw him at the county ground cleaning up Zach Crawley, just to give us a little bit of a flavour of what he's about. Here's James Coyne.
It's a real classic piece of Northants recruitment. They've found this guy on a 3-year deal who's got a UK passport. That's what you really need. Is Northern Irish via his Northern Irish grandmother. And it really shows, I suppose, the strength in Australian cricket when you've got a former Australia under-19, pretty quick bowler sloshing around the system who's only played 18 first-class games to this point. He had to move from Western Australia to Queensland to try and find game time, and it's there that he would have encountered Darren Lehmann, who's now the Northants head coach. And I think another reason why it's quite a canny piece of recruitment is that he's already played 3 years of club cricket, good level club cricket in this country, so he knows the English length. He'll know the conditions. He's, by all accounts, a pretty quiet guy, a hard worker, but very committed. I mean, he got off the flight from Australia, went straight to the press day and had his photos taken and everything and fronted up. So he could be a real handy signing for Northants as they look to try and bounce back into Division 1 and get back into the knockout stage of the white ball competitions.
James Coyne there. I also messaged a colleague in Australia who played... It really irritates me because he's an incredibly good cricketer. And so when I asked him about Liam Guthrie, he just talks about the times he'd played him. And I went, that's annoying. I wanted you to kind of talk about it in hypotheticals. And it was kind of a great example of what we were referring to kind of earlier about where can you give someone the opportunity that they don't currently have? Are you giving them the opportunity to improve their life, as it were? And because Liam Guthrie was just fine and good in Australia. He's a good cricketer who was behind kind of Jason Berendorf and Jai Richardson, and that's fine and respectable. But because there's only 6 teams, there's only so many opportunities. If there are 18 state teams in Australia, I imagine he'd have stayed, but he's able to have the opportunity to come out. And that kind of doubles down on this ongoing theme about kind of overseas player, that the best ability is availability, which is kind of a trope of mine that I love to refer to often. And you do see that with like Simon Harmer, Kyle Abbott, who've had these long-standing relationships with their counties. And you see the kind of difficulties that counties are operating in now. We've got all the Western Province players who are going to be arriving in round 2. We're going to have a lot of players, overseas players, arriving this week who weren't available for week 1. So Carl Verena will be back at Nottinghamshire. Dane Patterson should be arriving at Middlesex. Beddingham's going to be back at Durham.
Anderson Phillip should be at Lancashire. His visa. There's so much. I was at Worcestershire's press day last Wednesday, and I said to them, "I was Jacob Duffy with you next week in time for round 2." And Brett D'Oliveira, their captain, looked at me and said, "We do not say that they are with us until they are sat next to me in the changing room." Last year, Usama Mir pulled out of Worcestershire's T20 Blast campaign at 24 hours' notice. So they found Hayden Walsh on a golf course in the Caribbean, stuck him on a flight without his cricket bags, but with his golf clubs, which is very obvious.
Very important.
Landed with golf clubs, no cricket stuff, because you've got to do this 24-hour search where everyone gets on their phones and goes, right, finals leg spinning around off the blast. Because guys, like even now on this, with what you've just said there in the last minute, I would be very surprised if all of those people we've just mentioned who are meant to be here for round 2 are here for round 2. Because so much can go wrong, whether it's visas in Anderson Phillips' case, he was delayed by that, whether it's Matt Henry, who's got this unspecified injury that's going to delay his arrival at Somerset, whether it's someone getting off for play on the Wednesday and feeling jet lagged and having a little back spasm on the back of it and you can't pick them, which is tricky because if you've only signed them for 5-6 games, it's then 4 or 5 games. So
exactly,
I don't envy the guys who've got to make sure that these people arrive and are sat in a changing room ready to go, because it's one of the toughest jobs in the game at the moment.
I do one note on Anderson Phillip and Jaden Seals, who's joined up at Sussex. I think this is relevant because we often kind of bemoan the powers that be in cricket and like the power of the franchise leagues, but we're speaking about that from a position of being in England where the financial pool and the opportunity to play in the county championship still does have weight. Jaden Seals and Anderson Phillip left Trinidad and Tobago for their final 2 matches of the season when Trinidad and Tobago are challenging for their first title in about 20 years. And as far as I'm aware, there may have been movements to try for them to try. Shock horror, they might have wanted to stay and try and win a title with their home nation for the first time in 20 years. But, well, they weren't playing. And funnily enough, if you do check that Trinidad scorecard where Phillip and Jaden Seals weren't available for, they'd given Shannon Gabriel a call who hadn't played a Fred ball game in over 2 years. And they went, Shannon, we need you. We need bodies on the pitch. And they lost. So there we go. Title showdown against Guyana coming up, in case that tickles your fancy. Right, we're going to move on to part 3. Right, I want to speak about Tom Banton here, because Tom Banton has achieved something on the pitch which realistically none of us are going to. He scored 371. He's broken Somerset's all-time record for kind of a first class innings score. But he's done something that I think a lot of people strive to and wonder if they'll be able to, where they lose the love and affection for playing and then they kind of rediscover it. And Banton's now publicly spoken about it. He did an interview with Wisdom.com where he referred to the fact he hated the game. And I don't know if this is a particularly nice thing to say, but I remember it became almost anecdotal, where if I was with friends or colleagues and someone mentioned Tom Banton, you'd go like, oh, yeah, hates the game. Like, it was a thing. It was known that kind of Banton was not enjoying cricket, basically. And he's now returned to this place where he's loving the sport. He's playing with Somerset. He's back in the red ball setup. He's scoring loads of white ball runs. And kind of having made that connection where remembering that cricket's a game again to be enjoyed has led to success. But the bit I want to pick up on, and I really want to stress that I'm kind of separating this from Banton here, because I think it's more a general case for the conversation as opposed to in relation to any one individual, is I've never found when these stories take place that the rediscovering of for the love of the game happens without the return to form. Does that make sense? Just kind of the idea that there is still a correlation between enjoyment and performance. And that makes me uncomfortable and a bit worried, where I go
I think the nuance here is that the conversation often only, the nature of interviewing someone, wanting to get in touch with someone, to speak to someone, often comes on the back of good form, doesn't it? So you actually end up in a, and Banton's a perfect example. Sure, he spoke publicly before the season, but he was also speaking publicly after dominating the ILT20, finishing last season really well with that 100 against Surrey before he twisted his ankle, getting his recall to England squads. All that stuff happened, I think, before that conversation. But the point is, he was going well, which was what led to the conversation. And I guess you end up there with the question is, how have you come to be? How have you rediscovered this form? And part of rediscovering that form is rediscovering the happiness and the enjoyment of the game. I interviewed Sam Hain a couple of months ago for the website, and he was really good on this, actually, for 2 reasons. Firstly, because he's not had a particularly good time of things on the field in the last however many months. And secondly, because I didn't ask him about it, I said, how are you doing? Because it was February and it was the first question. Yeah. We were sat at Edgbaston, and I thought he'd say, it's quite cold, isn't it? I preferred it when I was getting married in Australia over the winter or in South Africa. And he took us very quickly to that place. And because a year ago, in fact, this round, he pulled out Warwickshire season opener in 2024 at a day's notice, missed the first month of the season. And basically, he decided he wasn't enjoying cricket. He spent so long chasing it, and I think that is similar to Banton. I think similar to a lot of players. You're chasing something that you can't really, that's completely out of your control, whether you get the runs or not, or take the wickets or not. And he felt like he was playing for the wrong reasons and striving for the wrong reasons and not enjoying it as a result. And he stepped away from it. And bear in mind, he made his England debut the previous winter, so previous autumn against Ireland in those ODIs. He's not played for England since. He's not scored a hatful of runs since. He had a pretty underwhelming SA20 over this winter, but he loved it. And the one thing he wanted to say to me was that he's in a much better place now, and that was completely uncontingent of runs or success. And it was interesting because but what I found interesting there is that conversation, if Sam Hain had gone 100 to start the season, and I'd not done that interview then, I'd probably be doing that interview in 2 weeks' time and probably ending up with a similar result to those Banton comments where you're talking to someone who's done really well and saying, so actually I think the answer is somewhere in between, because I don't think you can get back necessarily to the level you want to be at without finding that mental space again. So it's chicken and egg, isn't it? I think that's perhaps the. I
find that kind of reassuring from Sam Hain. This is a question rather than.
But we both play club cricket, and there's that. Like I was thinking about when you suggest that we talked about it talk about Banton's innings in this sense, like I was trying to think purely on like a club cricket level. Like, do I feel like I love cricket any more than normal, or hate it any more than normal, depending on how you go on a Saturday? And like, as much as everyone, no, but we say you nick off first ball and you walk off, and you go, I hate it.
No, I 100% yes, definitely. If I'm playing badly, I hate it. But this is what I mean in that, like, I feel like where I find Sam Hain's kind of thought process reassuring is that I think if you've got 4 combinations of experience, right? I've heard about playing well and enjoying it. I've heard about playing well and not enjoying it. I've heard about not playing well and not enjoying it. I've never really heard about not playing well and still enjoying it, and especially in terms of like your experience of the sport. And so I googled what was the exact phrase I put into Google, rediscovering the love cricket. Okay. And I got the first 4 results that came up were Simon Kerrigan, a Worcestershire all-rounder called Gareth Andrew, Andrew Meads down at Somerset, and Glenn Maxwell. And all of them referred to the fact of like Gareth Andrew, after an excellent start to the season, kind of Glenn Maxwell talks like scoring runs in a club game. Andrew Mead, kind of first and foremost, I think I'm a better cricketer than I was previously. And I think your point about these conversations happen when we're going to get in contact with the players because they've been doing well. So that's kind of the natural order of the conversation. And I think that's a good point. I think that's a very salient point.
The other thing that Haynes said, actually, it was touching one of those other 4 circumstances you mentioned. And actually probably the one that found the most interesting at the time was in last year's pre-season. He started pre-season with a couple of 50s in a row, and he said the bit he found hardest was almost that from the outside, he knows the people on the outside are going, geez, Haney's shaping up well, isn't he? He's going to have a good season.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas actually you've got this player out there who's going, God, I'm hating this. And it was interesting that him taking a break came on the back of getting runs in pre-season.
I hope. I guess my point is, I hope both for Banton and everyone, every player, that these times where it's very easy to say, oh, like, I'm getting out now and I'm not throwing my bat across the changing room, is because they are just kind of enjoying the game properly, and not because you're like, I'm not angry this week because I got 300 last week and I'm feeling all right about myself. And I went down, I don't know why, I'll be interested to know if people find this conversation interesting, because it's one of the things that I basically caught myself chatting about it with a friend and then mentioning it to you. And I went back and I found a piece I read recently by Gideon Hay on Moses Enriquez that he did almost 10 years ago, when Enriquez took a break from the game for kind of mental health issues. And there was this kind of paragraph, which, again, I think reassured or is the right word, where I went, that's the bit I haven't really heard about, where he returned to the game having been out, and in his first 4 innings in the Sheffield Shield, he scored 32 runs and he was, quote, staring at the poorest season of his career. All the same, Moises felt over the worst. I thought, this is exactly what we've been working on. The sun's still coming up in the mornings. They might drop me, but I hope they don't, because I actually really want to play. And I think that kind of, I guess potentially answering our own question here and potentially just having a chat for the sake of it without any really concluding anything. I feel like that's the snippet of the conversation that we don't hear very often, and we often, to your point, don't have the access to hearing about, where players, we find out that they've rediscovered the love and are enjoying the game again, even when kind of performances on the pitch aren't going right. To completely undermine that, Enriquez then just went out and scored 116 red. So it was all fine again.
I went to Taunton. I was meant to be going to Northampton on Sunday, and on Saturday evening I changed my mind, partly because Northampton games didn't have left to run, but also I thought it would be. I thought I'd regret not being there if Banton had gone and made 600, let's say, or Ponsonby or whatever. And actually, I was there for 27 runs and 22 balls in 22 minutes, and he batted like a bloke who was much stiffer than the previous morning. But there was something. I really enjoyed that element of it, because actually, almost one of the worst bits of this sport. I think I remember saying last year, Sam Northeast followed his 300s at Lords against the Cooker with a couple of those scores in a row the next week, and there's every chance. There's every chance that Banton will rock up at Sussex next week and drag on first ball, and that's the game. But actually, but even just watching him not struggle, but miss time a few in the 360s. I enjoyed that from a human perspective, but also I enjoyed watching him walk off at the end because there is like that. This sounds ludicrous to say, it doesn't need to be said, but I always think like you walk like it just puts Lara into perspective, doesn't it? You get 370 and you're still 130 short of this guy who. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
Brian Lara has the. Think about all the times in history people have walked out to the middle to bat. Think about how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times that is. And he's got the highest score.
62,000 first class games, and no one. And there's this one dude ever who's passed 500.
But Nick,
and I know it's millions. I know it's not millions.
No. That's not what I'm saying. It's not that he's just got the highest ever first class score. He's got the highest ever test score as well. In both, he's my favourite cricketer in history for a reason. Right.
Nick, as you wrote for the cricketer, of course.
As I wrote for the cricketer. Right, we're going to wrap this up. I do highly, highly recommend, if you have found this interesting, going back and finding Gideon Hayes' piece on Cricket et al., which it's a long read. It's fantastic. I also highly recommend subscribing to the cricketer. You can get the first month for just £1, and then for the rest of the 12 months, it'll be $29.99. We had reporters at 7 of the 9 opening county championship fixtures. I can safely say that no one else in the country is doing that. It really is a breadth of coverage that you're not going to be getting anywhere else. And it's cheap. Get involved. And when you sign up, if there's a little box somewhere, say you signed up because you really enjoyed Nick and Cam's chat on the County Conversation. What a treat. Do you agree with that, Nick?
Where we concluded that Brian Lara was good.
Oh, my God. I can talk about Brian Lara being good forever. Right. It's been the County Conversation, episode 2. Oh, a lot more than that. Episode 2 of 2025. Hope you enjoyed it. I've been Cameron. Nick has been Nick. And we'll see you and speak to you again next week.